Thanks for joining us in the state level actions and issues and the policy panel. My name is Susan Hall, and I believe we are recording. Yes, we are. My name is Susan Hall. I'm co-founder and CEO of 95% Group, and I'll be your moderator today. There are 4 panel members who I'm delighted to introduce you to in a moment. Kiamona Burke, who is Policy Director of Early Literacy of the Foundation of Excellence in Education. She supports states that are improving their K-3 literacy policies. She formerly was the State Literacy Director for Mississippi Department of Education. Lori DePaul, and she is the co-state director of Decoding Dyslexia. Terry Clark, who is with Read On Arizona, and Read On Arizona is a K-3 literacy initiative in the state of Arizona. They have a wonderful Twitter handle, by the way, in case you are looking for new ideas. Their Twitter handle is great. And Stephanie Gregson, and she is a Deputy Executive Director of the California Collaboration for Educational Excellence. She works with districts, especially on school turnaround in the area of improving literacy, and she formerly was at the California Department of Education leading state level planning work. All right, so I'm going to start out and I'll introduce a couple of questions that we'll be addressing today, the panel members will be addressing today. And the very first one is, we're going to look outside of the state of California, and we're going to look at what other states have literacy initiatives and what they have done. We're going to do that to figure out what we can learn about what makes these initiatives effective. So I'd like to ask Kiamona to please, I cannot see you, but I assume that you are there. There she is. Hopefully you can see her, and I'm going to ask you to please share with us information that pertains to other states and what they're doing.
Well, it's afternoon here. I'm here in Mississippi, so good morning to those of you who are on our West Coast. I am Kiamona Burke, and as Susan stated, I am the current Early Literacy Policy Director for the Foundation for Excellence in Education. So when transitioning from my work from the Mississippi Department of Education and leading our statewide initiative with the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, I have been placed in this unique position to support states across the country. 20 states specifically that have adopted either comprehensive approaches to improving literacy outcomes or some of the components of improving literacy outcomes that are state-led. So I'll first start by saying that, of course, prior to the pandemic, we knew in the country that we had a reading problem, right? NAEP scores from 2019, fourth grade reading showed that about 35% of our fourth graders were proficient in reading. That began a lot of the conversations at the state level about what we can do in order to collectively improve student outcomes. And then the pandemic happened, right? So our parents at this point began to see firsthand that in some cases, the grades that teachers were sending home that supposedly reflected how well their children were performing in their classrooms really didn't line up with what they were seeing when they were with their children sitting at the dinner table and helping them to complete, whether they were homework packets for states and school districts that were just not ready to transition into online learning, or whether they were synchronous, asynchronous. You know, we learned all of these words, right, during the pandemic, whether they were synchronous or asynchronous instruction. Parents really got an opportunity to see firsthand that in some cases their children were struggling. So during the pandemic, we began, and I began here at Excel in Ed, having a lot of conversations with states that may not have been interested in looking at early literacy policies before, but knew that something bold had to happen when we all returned to what we considered normal. But I still don't think we're there yet, right? So we still have our new normal. So what has happened, especially in this last legislative session, has really been kind of a flurry of states that have said that we're going to adopt this approach to improving literacy outcomes. And so what does this approach include? I'll start by saying that with these components, I look at them in buckets as to, first, what are we going to do for our teachers? And that includes science of reading professional development. We knew here in Mississippi, there's no secret. We had been 50th as long as there was a list to be last, right, in education. So we had to not take for granted that we felt that our teacher preparation programs were doing what needed to be done to the degree that it needed to be done in order to teach candidates to teach children how to read. So we first knew that we had to have science of reading professional development to build our teachers' knowledge and to empower them to teach children how to read. But we also placed literacy coaches in our lowest performing schools to assist our teachers from moving that knowledge, the theory that they learned in PD, to practice, to actual classroom instruction and to practice. And our coaches were on site to help them do that. I'll say we came late to the high quality instructional materials game. We started training our teachers in this science, and they would then go back to their classrooms and say, well, what I learned in training is not lining up with the materials and the curricula that my district has adopted, right? So then we had to begin to look at how can we ensure that our teachers are getting high quality instructional materials in their hands that are not only aligned to our state standards, but also aligned to the science of reading and those foundational skills. So that's what are we going to do for teachers, right? The next thing is, what are we going to do for students, which includes universal screeners for characteristics of dyslexia. How do we establish baseline data to know where our children are so that we'll know what to provide, the types of interventions that we need to provide to our children, and then also the types of enrichment that we need to provide to those children who are already there. And I think that group a lot of time gets really lost in this conversation because we talk so much about struggling readers and how we can get them where they need to be, that we don't think about those students who are there and who need to continue to be engaged in enrichment activities. Okay, so what are we doing for our students? And then for those students who are considered at risk, how are we documenting our interventions? How are we monitoring the progress of our children? So then we look at also a very, very important group, our parents and families. How can we support our parents and families? How can we ensure that they are notified as soon as possible as to how their children are performing, and then give them resources as to how they can assist us at home? I heard in the opening about, how we have to move from parent engagement to parent partnership, and parents are our partners. And we learned that if we had never learned it before during the pandemic, right? Parents must be our partners. I found some schools doing some very innovative things now, saying, well, now we can have PTA meetings on Zoom. You know how difficult it has been to get parents to come out to schools at 6 o'clock in the evening to have these parent-teacher conference, PTA meetings. And now they're looking at more innovative ways to invite parents in without saying, well, you have to get off work and then you have to come here and then you have to feed your kids, those types of things that have come out of the pandemic. So how can we support our parents and families and also make them partners, right? So now we're looking at all of these things as a comprehensive approach to improving student outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about what some states have done. In this last legislative session, Tennessee was the first state during the session to commit $100 million to early literacy efforts. They passed 2 laws. One law was the Early Literacy Success Act that included all of those components that I talked about earlier, but they also included teacher preparation program alignment to the science of reading, criteria, expectations that teacher prep programs look at their coursework and ensure that their teachers are receiving science of reading training during the coursework. In addition to that, they passed the second law that's called the Learning Loss Act. In this law, it actually includes opportunities for different summer bridge and summer learning opportunities for kids and also for tutors. So that has also been a move by some states to now leverage tutors in an intentional way, not just another body in the classroom, right? So leverage tutors to ensure that our students are receiving the interventions that they need. So that was Tennessee. North Carolina just revived their North Carolina Read to Achieve Act, and now it's called the Excellent Public Schools Act, where they've now also included a criteria for teacher preparation programs and science of reading professional development, not just for K-3, but also for kindergarten through 5th grade teachers. What's been unique about this conversation about curricula is that Arkansas recently passed a law that essentially bans curricula that is based on and highlights the 3 queuing system. Banned it, put it into law, attached it to funding, and said that any school district that adopts curricula that is not aligned to the science, that there will be a 10% reduction in funding every month. That after they've received the notice that they must change their curricula. So that is a really bold statement about ensuring that there are high quality science of reading aligned curricula in classrooms. And also Colorado passed their transparency law, which means that every school district in the state of Colorado must have on their website the evidence-based curriculum that they are using, so that all stakeholders would know that they're using curricula that is grounded in the science of reading. So this science of reading movement, as we've said, there's a lot of research that supports it. But now there are states that are saying that we must do something to hold our school districts accountable for ensuring that what children are learning and how children are learning is evidence-based. So that's just a few of the states. And there is a document that we developed here at Excel in Ed that really highlights, it's called the state-by-state analysis. It highlights what states are doing as it relates to the components that I spoke of earlier, and that it also gives a map, kind of a heat map, as to where states are with implementing these different components. So I'll be back, I know, towards the end to kind of talk a little bit more as we close, but I want to kind of pitch it to Terry, who's going to talk specifically about some of the recent requirements in Arizona.
Thanks, Kimyana. Arizona has been working collectively on early literacy for actually quite some time. I actually helped guide the work of Read on Arizona, which is the state's early literacy collective impact initiative, focused on early literacy, birth through the end of 3rd grade. So, and actually I was in California for 2 decades before coming to Arizona to do this work. So I'm really happy to be here with everybody. But what brought me to Arizona, and I think what's really been effective for our work is the collaboration. So I want to talk a little bit about that and why we think that's sort of the secret sauce here in Arizona. Read on Arizona is a neutral source for data, for literacy expertise, and the collaboration necessary to move some of these things along as we try to find scalable solutions that are anchored in the science of reading. So we have a data collection and data tools and coordination and research analysis that we do together with our state agencies, with our education stakeholders and policy leaders. Key background is that we've actually had a 3rd grade retention policy since it was passed in 2010 and began implementation in 2013, called Move On When Reading. So that was the beginning of our policy early literacy journey. Its goal was to have all students reading at grade level by 3rd grade. It has been in implementation, and we have continued to refine that as we've learned more. We also began to have policy around the dyslexia training, as many other states have, and are now required to have a K-1 screening and intervention system and build teacher capacity in the science of reading and dyslexia. I think one of the things we learned really quickly, or I think what we were smart about, was to not look at that dyslexia legislation as something separate. And we really asked and worked towards having it be integrated with what we were already doing in the systems in place because of our Move On When Reading retention policy that had a K-3 assessment cycle in it already. And then, as Kimyana mentioned, just last year, in last legislative session, we had identified a number of things based a lot on what we've seen Mississippi seeing such success. We actually did a deep dive with Mississippi, a state-to-state learning exchange in the early part of the pandemic, and asked them the key drivers. And and learned from them and sat down with stakeholders, and together we identified the things that we felt we were doing that were similar to Mississippi and we needed to maybe do at a higher dosage, and things that we weren't doing quite yet, and how did we get those. So together that evolved into a state early literacy policy framework that all of my partners, all of the Arizona partners together were part of: the State Board of Ed, our Arizona Department of Ed, our early childhood organization called First Things First, and hundreds of other literacy stakeholders. So that early literacy policy framework called for building educator capacity. So in the training of the science of reading with educators, increasing literacy coaches, especially we stole right out of the playbook for Mississippi, the swarm literacy coaching, and also just a commitment to evidence-based literacy solutions. And then in early learning opportunities, we called for an increase of high quality early learning opportunities and the assessments necessary so that we could not as much focus on it as an accountability issue, but also just, again, kindergarten entry assessment tools so that we knew how kids were coming in, what strengths they were coming in with, and what gaps they might need supports in. And that legislation allowed us to have some really pretty transformative things for Arizona. By 2028, all K-5 teachers will be trained in the science of reading and required to have a literacy endorsement. Our institutes of higher ed having to refine and improve their coursework in the science of reading, and then pass the literacy exam to earn that certification. Also, again, the funding to support the swarm coaching model here in Arizona, funding to pay for some of the exams for teachers to qualify, and then also the funding to have that kindergarten entry evaluation tool. So those were all a comprehensive sort of package. And then we also called for additional funding using some of the targeted relief dollars from the federal ARP dollars that were coming. So all in all, that legislation that passed and new investments in literacy that totaled over $100 million, all based on a shared agenda around a policy framework focused on improving literacy outcomes for our youngest learners to help them meet their reading potential. So those are the kinds of things that we're working on in Arizona that we're excited about. But I do think that what makes it effective is that we're all working on it together. It's a shared priority.
Terry, thank you so much for sharing information about what's been happening in Arizona. They have been trying for a number of years, and I've done a lot of professional development there and quite familiar with the efforts. So thank you for sharing. We appreciate it. I'm going to turn now our panel's conversation to what progress California has made in implementing any kind of statewide initiatives. And so I'm going to start by asking Lori if she will describe some of the legislative activity that is going on and has already happened in California.
Thanks, Susan. I'm Lori DePole, Co-State Director of Decoding Dyslexia California, and I've selected some key recent legislative bills to talk about, and then I will turn it over to Dr. Gregson, who's going to get into some literacy initiatives and talk a little bit about the State Literacy Task Force. So there is definitely a stark contrast to what other states in the nation have accomplished with respect to incorporating the science of reading into the classroom and where California is in that process. I'm sure that's not a surprise to anybody on this webinar. But as a state, we really need to shift from a wait to fail approach to reading to one that embraces a model of prevention. We need to demand early identification and intervention for struggling readers. And every teacher enters the profession wanting their students to obtain literacy, and yet we are not doing an adequate job in preparing most teachers to teach reading that is grounded in science. So I want to share with you some recent California legislation that we're hoping will make some early stage inroads to change this. First, Senate Bill 488. This bill was authored by Senator Susan Rubio and was signed by Governor Newsom on October 8th. This new law will require the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, or CTC, to tighten teaching standards around the science of reading and issue new standards by September 2022. There is no ambiguity. The standards need to include and specify all 5 of these requirements. 1, the study of organized, systematic, explicit skills, including phonemic awareness, direct, systematic, explicit phonics and decoding skills. 2, a strong literature, language, and comprehension component with a balance of oral and written language. 3, ongoing diagnostic techniques that inform teaching and assessment. 4, early intervention techniques. And 5, guided practice in a clinical setting. Additional teaching standards to be issued by September 2024 will incorporate the California Dyslexia Guidelines, which are grounded in structured literacy-based approach to reading, as well as standards on how to support literacy within a tiered system of supports with an increased focus on foundational reading skills. Teacher prep programs will need to incorporate these new standards into their coursework in order to maintain accreditation. These standards will apply to all new multiple subject, single subject English language arts, and ed specialist teaching credential candidates. The Reading Instruction Competence Assessment, or RICA, will sunset on July 1, 2025. It will be replaced with the new Literacy Teaching Performance Assessment, or TPA. The new Literacy TPA must assess all multiple subject and ed specialist candidates for competence in instruction and literacy, including evidence-based methods of teaching foundational reading skills in a manner aligned to the science of reading as detailed in the California Education Code. The RICA passage requirement will remain in place until the Literacy TPA is available. Before requiring the passage of the new TPA, CTC must certify that all approved teacher education programs provide instruction in the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to teach the science of reading. SB 488 requires public transparency and accountability. CTC will be required beginning July 1, 2022 to report back to the state legislature on an annual basis as to the work it's doing in developing the new Literacy TPA and in issuing new science of reading-based teaching standards, including how CTC engaged stakeholders in this process. Too often, teachers share with us that their teacher prep program left them underprepared to provide evidence-based reading instruction to their students. This adds to teacher frustration, burnout, and high rates of job turnover. Many new teachers in the classroom are left scrambling to find professional development to fill the gaps in evidence-based reading instructional knowledge, often doing this on their own time and paying for coursework out of their own pockets. Too often, school districts are left trying to fill these gaps where they are faced with severe limitations with respect to the time allocated to in-service professional development. We cannot expect our school districts and individual teachers to try and make up for the deficits in teacher prep programs. SB 488 serves to raise the bar on teacher prep programs to better prepare teachers in evidence-based reading instruction. Californians need to remain vigilant in ensuring that CTC implements and enforces these higher level teaching standards going forward. Next, I'd like to talk about Senate Bill 237. This bill was authored by Senator Portantino. Decoding Dyslexia California is a bill co-sponsor. SB 237 passed unanimously through California Senate, and it currently has 16 co-authors and strong bipartisan support. The bill now heads into the Assembly when the state legislature reconvenes in January. SB 237 has strong support from the California State PTA, American Academy of Pediatrics, anti-recidivism organizations, many human rights organizations, and disability advocacy groups. SB 237 would require that the State Board of Education approve a list of culturally, linguistically, and developmentally appropriate screening tools for annual universal screening in K through 2 for risk of dyslexia. K through 2 students would be screened in key early literacy skills using brief, low-cost instruments that help target instruction and intervention for struggling readers in the general education setting. Universal screening would occur in early grades where research shows interventions are most successful. The bill would abandon current failed practices of waiting until 3rd grade or later to intervene when frequently the reading gap has become too large to overcome. It takes 4 times as long to intervene and has less of a success rate due to years of low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, and school refusal that often are experienced by children that suffer from illiteracy. According to the National Center on Improving Literacy, 39 states have screening laws for risk of dyslexia. California is one of only a few states that continues to cling to its wait to fail approach in addressing the reading gap. According to the California Department of Education, quote, one of the greatest contributing factors for lower achievement scores in reading is lack of early and accurate identification of students with dyslexia. This bill needs to pass this upcoming session or it will die. Our state legislatures need to hear your voice in support of this bill. Dr. Hall, our panel moderator, will be adding to the chat a link to an educator open letter of support to Senator Portantino, thanking him for authoring this important legislation. There is also a link to an online petition, both in English and Spanish, to let your state legislator know you support this bill. It takes less than a minute to show your support. Lastly, I want to highlight a state initiative that is being worked on as it fits nicely into what SB 488 is trying to accomplish. The universities of California and Cal State Universities have formed a collaborative for neurodiversity and learning. The collaborative is being co-directed by Dr. Sue Sears from CSU Northridge and Dr. Marianne Wolf, one of the leading global experts on the science of reading and the links between emerging brain science and classroom practice. Dr. Wolf is currently the director at the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA School of Education and Information Studies. The group is working across CSUs in revising teacher prep courses by developing model coursework and syllabi reflecting the science of teaching reading. They are also creating professional development materials for both general and special education teachers for use in both pre-service and in-service professional development. I highly encourage you to listen to the recording of the concurrent breakout session entitled Higher Ed and Teacher Preparation to learn more about this important initiative, as Dr. Sue Sears is a panelist. We are also adding a link for you in the chat to the April 2021 status update and the important work of this collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. My name is Stephanie Gregson. I was formerly the Chief Deputy Superintendent of the California Department of Education, and now I'm currently the Deputy Executive Director at the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. And I was one of those classroom teachers that went through the teacher prep program where my reading foundation professor prepared me to teach an all-white class that was GATE. And yet I started my teaching career in a classroom with 8 different languages of students of languages spoken by all of my 33 students. And I was very lucky in having a principal that understood the investment of time and professional learning to build my understanding around the science of reading, and grew my love for teaching reading and then helping others to understand the approach of quality instruction of teaching reading. And so I'm here today to share with you some of the current initiatives around grants and professional learning opportunities across the state. And first, I'd like to talk about the Early Literacy Support Block Grant, which is a $50 million grant that identified 75 schools across the state that had the lowest literacy scores for students within their districts. Out of those 75 districts, 73 applied for funding through this $50 million, and they are working with the Expert Lead in Literacy, the Sacramento County Office of Education, who will be supporting them in looking at their needs assessment, developing a literacy plan that includes professional learning, and coming together under a community of practice to understand what are those effective strategies in teaching literacy and improve the outcome. The ultimate outcome is to impact student outcomes. We also have the Comprehensive State Literacy Plan Development, the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant Program, which is a federal plan that created the State Literacy Plan for California, which was adopted in March by the State Board of Education. This provided an opportunity for 7 county offices of education to be identified to serve as local literacy leads. And those 7, and I'll go through them, but you can also find them on the CDE website at cde.ca.gov. If you type in literacy leads, it will take you to the page where it identifies that for birth to age 5, the San Bernardino County Office of Education is a local literacy. For K-5, we have the Los Angeles County of Education, San Diego County Office of Education, and Contra Costa County of Education. And for grades 6 through 12, it's the Butte County Office of Education, Tulare County, and Napa County Office of Education. And again, you can find those on the CDE website. Also on that website, you'll find the state literacy plan for California. And the goal of the state literacy plan was really to take all of the different resources and supports and guidance that were centered around literacy and show in one place how they all work together. And yes, it's a 126-page document, but it is a worthy read to show this is all we have going on in California, from the ELA, ELT framework, to the dyslexia guidelines, to our English learner roadmap, a multi-tier system of support, universal design for learning, how it all works together for improving literacy outcomes for students. Another piece that we have going on, and this was from the 21-22 budget, is the $10 million that is focused on professional learning around evidence-based literacy and intensive literacy interventions. This will be one of the reading intervention grants that's coming out of the California Department of Education and as a partnership by the CCE. The purpose of that is to strengthen reading instruction overall. However, it is only $10 million. So we have to think about the context of California of having over 10,000 schools. How far will $10 million go? So that's something to think about. And another piece that came out of the budget bill is a $50 million professional learning infrastructure grant focused on evidence-based accelerated learning strategies in literacy, mathematics, and language development. And this is for us to build, and this is being led by the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. This is for us to build an infrastructure of professional learning that is focused on evidence-based literacy, mathematics, and language development strategies that will meet students where they're at and accelerate their learning. But the point of this is to be accessible to every teacher, principal, and paraeducator across the state. Now, again, $50 million. And we have a very large state. So the infrastructure is going to be very important, along with the method of delivery for these professional learning opportunities. And that's what we're looking forward to and seeing as we build this out. And in the end of September of this year, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman, announced his literacy task force. And that is a task force with the goal of every student reading at grade level by 3rd grade, along with being biliterate. So the task force has met once, and they will be meeting again. They're charged with creating a strategy and make recommendations for legislation to meet that goal of every student reading by 3rd grade and embedding all of the statewide literacy initiatives. Another aspect of the literacy campaign by the superintendent is providing 1 million books to students across the state. And so we're at this point where in California, we haven't had a coordinated and coherent approach to literacy, professional learning, and literacy instruction since around 2008. And that's a long time. And if we were to step back and reflect at looking at all of these literacy initiatives, where's the coherence and the coordination of these efforts? And so I ask for us to think about that as we continue this conversation of what California can learn from other states and what we need to do in moving forward to support literacy outcomes for students.
Thank you, Stephanie. So we're going to move to our last question, and I'm going to ask every panelist to speak a little bit about this. The question is, what are your recommendations for what it will take to move the needle to improve California literacy? What should we be advocating for? And I'm going to ask Kiamona to please start, and then Stephanie to go next.
All right, so I am a huge proponent of building teacher knowledge. empowering teachers. We talk a lot about the importance of adopting the curricula that aligns and all of these other things. But the teacher who is standing in front of children every day, who must know when to modify instruction or how to respond to different students' needs, this really at a moment's notice, at any turn, teachers have to know this knowledge, have this knowledge in order to be able to do that. So I would advocate for professional development for our in-service teachers who are standing in front of children right now. And of course, to ensure that teacher preparation programs are aligning their content and their coursework, and even, of course, their field experiences, ensuring that candidates are able to have those field experiences with teachers who are using structural literacy as the basis for their instruction.
Great, thank you. Lori, will you, actually Stephanie, would you go next and tell us what you think we need to be doing?
Absolutely. I'll build on what Kimiona said. And, teacher knowledge is absolutely important. It's the type of professional learning that is extremely important. Teachers learn best within their own context, with having that peer partner or instructional coach partner right next to them, helping them understand and reflect and see, okay, this worked really well, this didn't. So really advocating for the quality type of professional learning that Kimiona was talking about with coaching, so that teachers are learning within their own context, and that you'll see a higher transference of learning and changing instructional practices through coaching. Also advocating for coherence and coordination across the state with county offices and state level initiatives. Patchwork quilting is not going to work when we're looking at trying to impact student outcomes. So how can we have a comprehensive literacy initiative, and not even be an initiative? I think initiative is the wrong term. A comprehensive literacy plan on professional learning that really gets at our teachers and impacting student outcomes.
Thank you, Stephanie. Terry.
I'm going to give you a few things. One, I think it really helps to not get distracted by the shiny new objects and to stay the course. I think a comprehensive, strategic, coordinated approach, but a long-term lens. I think often in policy world, we get, we go session by session and sort of forget that some of these things are going to take a while before we see the results. So you have to have that commitment to the long-term approach. But I think fundamentally, and what we talk about now here in Arizona, is we have to believe it's possible, and we have to believe in our kids, and we have to believe they can reach their reading potential. And it's us that has to have the higher expectations and do what we have to do, and be willing to let go of what's not working or what we need to change so that we can help them meet that potential. So
thank you. Lori, what are your recommendations?
Yeah, I totally agree with the something shiny over here. We can enact the best legislation or put forth a well-meaning state initiative, but unless we're going to follow through, provide technical support, and ensure compliance with new laws, then they just don't result in effective change. California is such a large state. It does take a lot to move the needle. Sometimes it feels like we're trying to turn around a large cruise ship. But I also believe, COVID gave us an opportunity to hear more of the parent and educator voice, with the ability to participate by Zoom and give public comments, where in the past, you may have had to have the luxury of driving to Sacramento and sit around for an entire day's meeting until the agenda item you were interested in came up. I think for too long, lobbyists, politicians, and teacher unions have dominated the conversation, and input from parents and educators who really see the direct impact of failed reading practices, their voice has been lost. And I think when we look at other states that are moving the needle, a lot of the momentum really started from pressure from grassroots movements like Decoding Dyslexia movements, and hopefully now the California Reading Coalition. I think, we're not I'm not kidding myself when we talk about SB 488, it's a major overhaul to revise our teacher prep programs. We will see resistance to this. We are going to find that there's a significant shortage of expertise in the science of reading at the faculty level in our institutions of higher education. We're going to need to provide additional training to faculty. I think we need to hold CTC responsible for strict monitoring of teacher prep programs in the area of science of reading. And in fairness, that means CTC needs to be better funded by the state. I also think we need to incentivize teacher prep programs that are doing a good job. And we need to continue to provide state funding to revamp reading instruction curricula for teacher prep programs and provide professional development through this UC CSU collaborative. I think it's received like $6 million in funding. That's nothing. We need to continue to push this. It's a great project. It's something that could make a huge impact, and we need to continue to invest in it and follow through.
Very good. All right. I've been monitoring the chat room throughout our session, and I want to just point out a couple things. Number one, one of our participants asked if we could post the resources in the chat box. I have done that. All of the ones that we've been describing today, that the panelists have described today, are in the chat box. You'll see the Foundation for Excellence in Education state-by-state analysis of progress on passing policies that are aligned with science of reading. It is a wonderful document. I am so grateful that I learned about it through moderating this panel. I downloaded it this morning and have been looking at it already. And it's really useful especially for those of you who are from outside the state of California who are listening. But I will note that California is shown in the minimal or no fundamental principles. And you look at this map, and there are a lot of states that are just doing a whole lot better than California. So it really inspires us to become involved, to advocate, to do everything we can to influence that California make major improvements to, frankly, catch up with, about a quarter of the other states. So I would definitely recommend that you get this state-by-state analysis. It's in the chat box, and be able to use that to talk about California is behind. California has some catching up to do. So that is in the chat box. Links to the Open Educator letters that Lori mentioned that you can click on and go directly and voice your opinion to help to pass the state bills that are currently under consideration for the dyslexia, and also a video about the Institute for the University Collaboration that has Dr. Marianne Wolf, who came from Tufts in Boston, is incredibly amazing person, and you've got her now in California. It's great, and she's going to hopefully do some great things. And then the link to the California State Literacy Plan. All of those are in the chat box. All right, so let me start with the first question that was posted. How do we, as parents, ensure that these actions create meaningful outcomes? Who of the panelists would like to talk about that? How can parents take action to make sure that we get meaningful outcomes?
I can take a stab.
Great.
So that's what Decoding Dyslexia California is. We're a grassroots movement of parents, educators, and other professionals. We've been actively engaged in some of the drafting of SB 488, the bill we talked about revising teacher prep. We are a co-sponsor of SB 237 for K-2 universal screening for risk of dyslexia. I think the important thing is making sure that when a bill is passed, like 488, that there is public participation in the CTC meetings as they develop teaching standards, and that there are public comments when things aren't going the way they should. So that public voice and participating in CTC meetings as they develop teacher prep standards. I also feel like with SB 237, this bill has a limited window to pass, and we need to make our voices heard. And filling out that petition, if you're interested in getting more actively involved in legislative efforts regarding this, join Decoding Dyslexia California, and let's make our voices heard.
Good. I'd like to just follow up with one comment. If you are thinking that the work that Decoding Dyslexia is doing only applies to those who have been qualified as dyslexic, it's really not the case, because the things that they are advocating for are good for all students. So I encourage you to consider becoming involved, and they will help you stay informed with the legislative bills under consideration and how you can add your voice. So I would encourage everyone. Let me go to another question. What about the kids or parents who essentially are now young adults or who are beyond the K3 area, K3 grades? What are we going to do to help them? So would any of our panelists like to tackle that question?
Well, I'll tackle it. I talk a lot also about adolescent literacy. And I think that what has happened as well, I don't think we talk enough about teachers who are alternate route or secondary teachers who enter the field from either another career, or they majored in biology, decided not to go to med school, and now they decided to teach, so they didn't go through traditional teacher preparation programs. So I think that we must provide professional development and also some support to our teachers who are in secondary classrooms, who are considered content experts. You know, I'm a biology teacher, so if I am a ninth grade biology teacher and a child enters my classroom who's a struggling reader, what do I do? And some of these supports that we're providing as far as interventionists and even interventions in the earlier grades, how can we begin to ensure that our secondary schools, whether it's school by school or whether it's someone in the district or someone, you know, with district administration, where they're able to support teachers in where to go. And I always say, find your people. But if you're not the person, find a person. If you know that you're not, versed in literacy instruction, but you know that you have children who are struggling readers in your classroom, you have to say something. You know, we can no longer just say, well, because this child is not causing any behavior problems, right? We're going to just let the child kind of sit there. We're not going to poke the bear, and we're going to just pass this child into the next grade. That continues the cycle. It continues the cycle of our children. And then they get to a classroom teacher that says, no, you're not performing well. And no one really knows what to do about it. So I think that first, for all of the parents who are here and who are actually on this particular, in this session, you're doing the best first thing, which is learning about all the things that are supposed to be happening in the classroom for your child or for your children, that they should be screened. We should know where they are so that we can provide interventions. And yes, there are interventions. And high quality tier 1 instruction is the best preventative tool there is. Teachers knowing how to teach reading, that's the best preventative tool there is. And so I just want to say that adolescent literacy is also a thing, or adolescent illiteracy, and we know that. So how can we ensure that we begin this pipeline with a strong start, but also continue to provide supports as students advance into upper grades?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like to add in just a little bit.
Yeah.
So with the Department of Education does have a grant called Callie Reads, and it is focused on adolescent literacy. And I'll put this in the chat, but going to calliereads.org to access to see which districts are a part of this grant, because it does focus on professional learning to middle school and high school teachers around literacy. And again, that's an opportunity here within California that's focusing on adolescent literacy. But I couldn't agree with Kimiona more. It's about high quality first instruction and speaking up when things are not working for your child, and looking at what are the interventions and supports that the district and the school site can offer you as a parent and your child.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a couple words to support what Stephanie and Kimiona both said. We know how to teach older struggling readers to read. There is no question about it. We know that we need to figure out what they already have mastered and where their gaps are, and fill in those gaps with the same kind of instruction that we provide our K3 students. So it's not really a mystery what to do. Unfortunately, teachers at that grade level have had, if we think that the K3 teachers haven't had enough professional development, the ones who have struggling readers at 4 and above have even a bigger challenge because they just do not have generally the background and tools. But the key thing about older struggling readers is that we do it with consciousness, that we don't want to ask them to read Matt when, Matt and Sat and Rat. We can teach them at the syllable level and back down to the single syllable if we have to. So it needs to be respectful, but it needs to be high quality and sequential instruction. Anyone else on the panel want to add comments on the older struggling readers? All right, I don't have any other questions that we have not addressed, but what I'd like to do is just to throw it open. We have about 5 more minutes or so, and this panel has an amazing, not only depth of information, but breadth of information about literacy policy making. And there are clearly some states that have just made tremendous gains in a reasonable period of time. And I'd still like to talk a little bit more about what are they doing? What made the difference there? What were the conditions under which those states seem to have had the right timing, the right momentum, whatever it takes to push this forward and actually get some particularly good, well-funded policies and initiatives in place. So I'm going to start with Kimono and then also ask Stephanie to think about it as well. And then Terry might want to chime in. What do you think has happened in those states? What made it go in those states?
Well, I'll say for Mississippi, we had what I kind of call the big three. They were all in sync. At the same time, our former governor, Governor Phil Bryant, who was really a champion, Literacy-Based Promotion Act is his baby, is dyslexic. And so for him, and he was retained 1 year. So for him, this was something that, he reached out to former Governor Jeb Bush and asked about what Florida had done because they passed this law in 2002. So they were one of the first states to pass the law. And they began to see some success kind of very early on. And they remain, I think Florida is still like number 6 in the nation for 4th grade reading. So he reached out to Excel and Ed, ironically at the time, and asked them to assist Mississippi with drafting the bill. At the same time, we had our House and our Senate Ed chairs who were champions for literacy. And then we also got a dynamic superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, who was a well-known early childhood advocate, but then also, of course, very innovative and forward-thinking. So when we had those big three, I call it, at the table at the same time saying that this is what we're going to do, I think that was really a benefit for us. And then our legislature in our first year gave us $9.5 million. And a lot of people say, well, oh my God, you did all of that with $9.5 million. And then the second year from 14-15 through this year, they continue to give us $15 million per year, every year. When our former governor finished his second term, our lieutenant governor at that time became our governor. And I guess really decided, I'm not going to touch that, right? We've been having some success with that. So I'm not going to touch that. But I think that, again, like I said, it's not just the law. That's one thing. That's the first step, but it's the implementation. So if you don't have your Department of Education, those who are going to serve as boots on the ground in your districts, your superintendents, your administrators, your coaches, those who will be coaching teachers to get these things done, then it's not going to be successful. You can't just say we want children to read by the end of 3rd grade. We also have to show that we're going to support teachers in getting there. Very good. Stephanie, do you want to add anything to that?
I will. So back in 2008, around that era, the state invested over $500 million in a comprehensive professional learning centered around literacy. And what it did was it focused on the teachers in districts and principals that were supporting those teachers. So it got through the county office layers, it got through the district administrative layers, and really focused on those who were creating the experiences for students on a daily basis. And we haven't seen that type of structure since in California. Mm-hmm. With the over $500 million, it also came with accountability, that the districts had to use the money in this way. And the instructional coaches were supported, the teachers were supported, there was a community wrapped around it. So I would strongly suggest California needs to step back and reflect on what do we have going on, where are the gaps, and why is this not working right now? And it speaks to what Kimiona was talking about, a long-term lasting investment in our teachers and our principals who are impacting students' experiences on a daily basis. And I noticed some pieces in the chat around the social emotional element of our adolescent learners. That's true for every single child. If we as adults are not providing them a learning environment that is safe and healthy and conducive to them thriving, then we have a problem.
Mm-hmm. And Terry, what can you add to our discussion?
Yeah, I think the other thing is that the states that we've seen, and we're part of the states that have been making progress on our NAEP scores, it's about thinking about it as a continuum and continuing to refine, building on the policy, keeping what works and letting go of the things that don't. And then also highlighting bright spots in our own backyard. We did case studies on schools that have had the most growth over the last 5 years, and that really helped people see what we were talking about and the strategies we wanted to see are possible because they're happening in our own backyard. And I think that really helped sort of to get people mobilized.
Yeah, I agree. Your case studies really did paint a picture for people. Sometimes it's hard for a school leader to say, what has to be in place? What does it look like? Your case studies were very well done. They're available. You can get them online. It's a nice way to paint that picture because that's what we are all going to need. We are very close to being out of time. I know what happens is we just get zoomed away. So let me do a final thank you to these panelists. This was a fantastic group to work with. I cannot thank you, each and every one of you, for the work that you did to plan this and to be willing to give your time to this topic. So thank you so much. There's a lot in the chat box. If you're a participant looking for a lot of links, they're in there. Just scroll up and copy them out of the chat box because there's a lot of great resources there. So thank you so much. I know we're going to be spun right back into the main meeting in just a second. But again, thanks so much for coming in and participating in our panel today. And we will all, by the way, has been recorded. So if you have colleagues that didn't get to attend this one, they can listen. All right, thank you.